There we go. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint in just a little bit. It's going to be a little different tonight. Stuart Embury is with us, but we weren't sure with a previously scheduled conflict if he would be able to actually join us tonight. So we pre-recorded it. So we're going to run the recording, and then Stuart will answer questions live towards the end. So with that, let me share my screen with you all, and we'll get us started. Share screen. This is the one we want, and then we're going to do whatever. Where'd my PowerPoint go? I hope you're having a good night. This is our annual program, and this is a monthly program. There we go. We pull this up right here. We should be screen sharing now. I'm going to start this from the beginning, and we're going to swap out. So there we go. Let me see what Nancy sees. Good. That's great. So welcome to Holding History in Your Hands. I'm going to walk us through the day. Our special guest is Stuart Embury, who is just an amazing guy. You've heard him before talking about artists and the life of artists and the Tile Club. Tonight he's going to share some amazing, wonderful letters, many of them illustrated, and tell us all about those. So with that, let's just keep moving forward. Who's the sponsor? Well, the sponsor is the Manuscript Society. And we do this every month as part of a member benefit and also to fulfill our mission as a not-for-profit educational organization. Why a webinar? Well, it's the best way to reach the most amount of people in the easiest way possible, in the cheapest way possible, and in the shortest amount of time. Why now? Because it's the first Monday of the month. We do it all the time. Who was invited? Certainly members of the Manuscript Society, all of their friends, all of their neighbors, some sister organizations that we're involved with, some appraisers and some archivists, and just some friends. What we're going to cover tonight, I'll get to in just a little bit, and how to get more information, once again, we'll get to in just a little bit. So History in Your Hands is going to be a personal tour of the incredible autograph collection of Dr. Stuart Embury. He's going to share some amazing letters and manuscripts from all kinds of well-known artists. I'll let you tell him, he'll tell you more about that in just a little bit. And at the end, he'll reveal some inside tips on finding special additions to your collection. Dr. Embury is a retired family physician from Holdred, Nebraska. He was involved in medicine for more than 50 years. He became interested in art when he started his practice in 1970 and began collecting original prints and American art books. He has more than 12,500 volume library in all aspects of American art and has donated some of them to some major organizations so that the rest of the world can enjoy them as well. A few years later, his interest turned to painting, watercolor, sculpture. He became friends with a variety of artists and published 3 books on one particular artist, as you can read right here. During the last several decades, he's focused on autographs, letters, documents, and manuscripts on American artists. He's got 1,500 pieces, with a Gilbert Stuart letter being the rarest, and he's going to donate the collection to the Archives of American Art. He's a longtime member of the support of the Manuscript Society. He's become a really good friend. We had great time down in Williamsburg together last year, and it's my delight to introduce you to him in just a moment. So with that, I am going to break away here and see if we can get this going here. I'm going to bring up a video, and I want to make sure this is going to work because we're trying something new for the first time. So you should be able to see this. I'm going to unshare this, and I'm going to rearrange a few things. We're going to do that. We're going to optimize our sound. Sorry for all the tech stuff. And we're going to give this a go.
Gee, it's great to be with you tonight and share part of my collection with you. Have you heard of Bard? That's the new Google AI program. And I got this email the other day asking me if I wanted to try it. So I said, well, what the heck? So I typed in manuscript webinar, and it thought for a few minutes and then started spitting out paper out of my printer. And I looked at the paper and I just shook my head because every other word was next or don't you know. I think some teenager must have been involved. So much for AI. I've entitled my program, History in Your Hands. Autograph collecting's been around for probably centuries, but I'm more interested in philography, the science of gathering letters and documents that have historical or cultural value. And that's a basic pillar of our history and culture. For, without these things, there would be no recorded history. They're the most intimate of all relics. They were handled by that great person, or they're written on, their thoughts, their words, maybe their emotions. And when I handle a letter written by Renoir or Gilbert Stuart or Napoleon or Toussaint, my heart quickens and I feel a sense of amazement that this document was part of their lives and I actually am holding it in my hands. Every true collector is strongly moved when he sees the autograph of a great personage. One of my first autograph purchases was the French Impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir. This painting is written on la Colette paper, and that was his studio in southern France. And of course, another thing of autograph collecting is I made a pilgrimage there to see his studio with friends. It's written to Ambrose Villard, who was a dealer, and he's writing for condolences for his mistress's son who died. Another interesting medical aspect of autograph collecting can be, look at Renoir here. He's got severe rheumatoid arthritis, and they literally strapped the brushes to his hands when he was painting in later life. This is his probably most famous painting called Luncheon at the Boating Party. And it's in the Phillips Gallery. And I've made a few trips there to view this painting. And another interesting medical aspect is later in life, he painted these nudes, and they're all orangey color. And it's felt that he maybe had cataracts. Mary Cassatt was an American Impressionist artist. And these letters escaped me for decades because rarely did any come on for sale. But this is really an important letter because the Luxembourg Museum in Paris wanted to buy one of her paintings for their permanent collection. And this was a huge deal for a new artist. And but the problem was Duran Real, the dealer, owned the painting and he wouldn't relinquish it. So she's writing to Joseph Real, his son, asking him to put a little pressure on his dad to release the painting, and he never did. But they bought another painting about 3 years later. Edward Manet was also an artist about the same period. And this is a great letter too, because he's writing to the Paris art dealer Duchamp. And he had loaned a painting called The Boaters to Duchamp to exhibit, and he never did. And so Manet wants that painting back because he has a chance of selling it. He writes a very interesting sentence here. He says, "I hope, mister, that you don't force me to write you a third letter, and I send my best regards." Even the address on here, Rue de Fürstenberg in Paris, brings back great memories because there was an old-time autograph dealer up on the third floor at that address. And I visited him many, many times and spent many hours in there just looking through his stock and visiting with him about autographs. Robert Henry, his real name was Robert Henry Cassatt. And this has special significance to me because his father was a riverboat gambler, Robert Cassatt. And he founded a town near my house called Cassatt, Nebraska. And he got into a fight with a cattleman one night, killed him, and they had to leave town in the middle of the night. And so he changed his name to Robert Henry. And he ended up in New York, and he had a townhouse on Gramercy Park. He's writing to Clarence Chatterton, who was a Vassar professor. And Chatterton wants him to help put together an exhibition of paintings for the gallery there. And Henry's writing back, it's a 6-page letter. He says, "That's probably not a very good idea. It's not great to ask an artist to pay for the exhibit." And they likely wouldn't do it because there's too many expenses. And then he puts in a real dig. He says, "The poverty of Vassar is the same kind of poverty I have met with many millionaires." So I think he ended up helping in the end. we talked about passion in letters and despair. And this letter is a favorite of mine. It's Albert Schweitzer, and it's written in German. And he, of course, was a medical missionary in West Africa. And he founded the Marine Hospital there. And he's writing to one of his colleagues who did C-sections there. And she evidently had to have a C-section herself. And he says, "My heartfelt congratulations to you and my best wishes for the life of the little being. And I tell the mothers in Lamborine, for the privilege of this child on earth, how beautiful an image that this life is only a pilgrimage." What a wonderful sentiment. And then I went on and I was extremely surprised when I read the postscript, because he says, the chaos that is my correspondence inhales that sometimes it takes a couple of years to write back on a letter. And he said, this poor guy who doesn't get anything out of life anymore, often I am in complete despair and I don't go to bed until after midnight. I had no idea that Schweitzer ever felt that way. It's not surprising though, because Lamborine was very hard to get to, but people would just show up unannounced and stay for months. Frederick S. Church was an artist and he was known for illustrating his letters. And this is, he did a little sketch of a woman sitting next to him when he's dining. And many artists illustrated their letters. Remington did, Russell did. And there's even a book put out by the Smithsonian that's about illustrated artists' letters, written by Liz Kerwin. So here's another illustrated letter, and this one has special significance also, because this letter was written by Clarence Ellsworth, and he was born in a drugstore in my hometown in 1885. And he became a producer, now he became an illustrator for movie sets in California. And he was really good friends with a lot of Indians, including Iron Eyes Cody here, who was an Indian actor. It's a 6-page letter, and this actually was his car, and he actually drove this out to Holdridge on a few occasions. The letter was from 1908. And here's 4 more pages, and he was well ahead of his time, because I don't think too many people were thinking about hang gliders in 2000 or 1000 in 1908. I'm sorry. And this young girl on this calf, I bought the letter from her when she was an adult. I tracked down a few of his paintings, and this painting is of Chief Red Cloud, and it's in our local museum. So my initial interest in artist letters was in artist letters, American artist letters. And so this is probably my rarest letter, Gilbert Stuart. He was a painter of Washington, of course, and there's been reported only 4 letters sold at auction in the last 100 years. The Archives of American Art they have a letter in their collection too. Charles Willson Peale was an artistic family, and all of his children, boys and girls, were painters, and quite good painters. And he was kind of a Renaissance man, because he was interested in natural history. So he started a museum in Philadelphia, a natural history museum, and kind of morphed into the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And you can see, here's a painting of him trying to exhume a mastodon in Upper New York. This is one of his sons, Titian Ramsey Peale. And he's writing to Benson John Lossing, who was an American historian. And he's asking for his help in writing a memoir of his father. He wanted some support also. And this is 2 of the other Peale brothers. That's a portrait of Rubens Peale. I believe this painting sold for $4.5 million or more. And this is painted by his brother, Rembrandt Peale. And he had beautiful handwriting, you can see. And he wants to sell a painting for $500. and he thought the frame was worth $30. Childe Hassam was an American Impressionist painter, and he's writing to Celia Traxtor. Celia's father had a small hotel on Appledore called Appledore on the Isle of Shoals, and a large number of artists would gather there every summer as an artist colony, and they would paint and smoke and drink and have great conversation. He painted Cecilia in the garden, and this painting is in the courtroom. This is my oldest letter, which is Benjamin West, 1815. He lived in England, kind of a historical painter. And I'm surprised that one or two come on the market every once in a while. Albert Bierstadt was an extremely important artist. He was a Hudson River School artist. And you can also notice a little medical interest on him. His right eye turns in. He has an esophoria. He was famous for going out west and painting in Yosemite in that area. He painted these huge landscapes. This is one in the lower left there, and that's 6 foot by 10 feet. And he's writing a letter of condolence to a woman. Worthington Whitridge was also a Hudson River School painter, and he also traveled out west, but not as far. And this letter is kind of special because he mentions Fort Kearny, which is was a cavalry fort about 35 miles from my front door. And he's talking about, he's now painting small paintings, 8 by 16 on the South Platte River, which is where that is. And he says he only does a few a year and they're in great demand. And he warns his buyer not to tell the price because he wouldn't honor that price again. Notice it's on the from the studio building, and one of the joys of autograph collecting is having autographs is you're always looking for something to research more. So I saw this 10th Street building, and I've seen this referenced in many other texts along the way. So I decided to look it up. And it was built in 1857 in New York, and it was built especially for artist studios. And it became the epicenter of art in New York in that time. Winslow Homer had a studio there, and Albert Bierstadt, we just mentioned, had a studio there. The most famous one was probably Frederick Edward Church. And then William Merritt Chase moved there and that's his studio, 1879. Quite an interesting studio, a lot of knickknacks there. It was raised in 1956 for an apartment house, and Julia Roberts bought the penthouse. My friend Luigi Lucioni, the painter, had his townhouse was about a block from there. This was a kind of a socialite artist, Abbott McWheel Whistler. I'm sure you know him. He painted Whistler's mother, of course. And this is an interesting letter in that he both signed it with both his name, James McWheel Whistler, and he also signed it with a butterfly. You can see it at the bottom. And most of his correspondence and letters he signed with the butterfly, as did all of his prints, his etchings and lithographs. And if you look online, Whistler butterfly, you'll probably see over 100 iterations of that because he did that many, many, many times. This is probably my most fortuitous purchase. I was at a barbecue in northern New York in probably 1980 or so, and the young book dealer came up to me and says, "Dr. Embury, I have something interesting I'd like to show you in my car." So we went out to the road, and he pulled this book out. It was written by Whistler, called The Gentle Art of Making Enemies. And that's a whole story in itself. But anyway, I bought the book. And when I got home, a month or two later, I was looking through it. And I about had a stroke because this was Edward Degas' copy. It's signed and inscribed by Whistler to Degas. Degas, charming enemy, best friends, and he signed it with the butterfly. I always felt that whether this was genuine or not, I thought it was, and I did a little sleuthing myself, and the handwriting matched. And certainly that butterfly is so intricate, I don't think anybody could copy it very well. So I was talking to a college professor about it, and he recommended this book, The Degas, the Artist's Mind, to me. I got the book, and I about fell out of my chair again, because in the book, as I was reading it one evening, one of the footnotes referenced my very book and the very inscription. It mentioned he's writing to a letter, it's Stephanie Mallarmé, and I got a copy of the letter online, and sure enough, he said that he had sent Degas that book. Who would guess, 1 in a million, that was 50 feet away? I have since had it authenticated that it is an authentic item. John Sloan was a founder of the Ashcan School and a member of what they call the 8 American Painters. And somebody had sent him a box of cigars. And so he sent back a box of cigars with a portrait of himself. John Sloan, the school was Ashcan School, or the 8th, and Henry was part of this too. And they painted the nitty-gritty scenes of New York, especially a lot of rooftops and the tenement buildings. And why did they call them Ashcan School? Because many of the critics of the day felt their paintings should be in the Ashcan. I actually love these two paintings. Another kind of dandy socialite artist was John Singer Sargent. He was became famous as a portrait painter, and he painted this portrait called Madame X, Portrait of Madame X. And it was exhibited in the Paris Salon in 1864, and it caused a huge scandal. All the white skin and the dress, and so it caused such a scandal that 2 months later he painted these straps in to kind of tone it down a bit. He has notorious handwriting. It took me probably a week to figure out this letter. Now a little more modern is Joseph O'Keeffe, Georgia O'Keeffe. She had a home in New Mexico, and she called it the Ghost Ranch. And of course, we had to make a pilgrimage there with some friends and visit the Ghost Ranch. She was reportedly Alfred Stieglitz's lover. And here's Stieglitz and O'Keeffe, and here's 2 of her New Mexico paintings. I took medical teams to Haiti for over 2 decades. And so I became, of course, interested in the manuscripts of Haiti, and they were extremely hard to find. A Manuscript Society member back then, Robert Batchelder, had a nice little stock of a few, and so I bought them. And this is a Bonaparte item. Bonaparte tried to retake Haiti, and he sent his son-in-law, General Leclerc, with 20,000 troops in about 1802 or so to retake the island. And this is an interesting military document. He signed it Bonaparte, you can see at the bottom there. And most of the ones you see today he just signed them NAP, N-A-P. This letter, really, I just love handling this document. It's Toussaint L'Ouverture, who is kind of the George Washington of Haiti. When the French were coming in, he was the general that was opposing him. And he was a slave, but he was a brilliant man. And he really wanted to stay in good graces with Napoleon. He wanted to work with Napoleon. He wanted to be loyal to France. But Napoleon tricked him and sent him to France in exile, and where he died in prison. And the King Henry Christophe took over, and he really made the North flourish. He was kind of a semi-benevolent dictator. And he always felt the French were going to return, so he built this magnificent citadel called a fortress on top of a 3,000-foot mountain. And it was all built by slave labor with no cement. And the next leader was Dessalines. He called himself Emperor Jacques II. And he was a brutal, brutal dictator. And he was assassinated. Incidentally, a majority of Haitian presidents have not died of natural causes. In fact, one was just assassinated 1 or 2 years ago. And of course, you all know Baby Doc. And I was in Haiti many, many times when Baby Doc was president. And I think most people who are familiar, myself included, wish that Baby Doc were still in power. Haiti was safe then. I was even there when there was a coup attempt with my 10-year-old daughter. And that was a very exciting time, but we were in no danger. His father was a physician, which I regret, but he was a brutal dictator. This small collection came my way then. Homer Hathaway was a writer and was doing an article called on modern art and religion. And so he sent letters out to about 50 artists, and he got 47 returns, and I bought all the returns. And there's some great letters of Abraham Ratner, was a modern artist, of course, and Harari, Auschwitz, all interesting handwriting, Zaboli. And I think it would make a great book, or even somebody could do it for a master's thesis. Then a small archive of Civil War letters. I saw that in a dealer's catalog in Denver. And there was about 12 letters. So I thought, well, let's look at that. That looked really interesting. And they really turned out to be a fascinating collection. The John C. McDowell, who was with the 22nd Wisconsin Volunteers, wrote the letters to his mother, and thank goodness he had good handwriting. And at the top, it tells kind of where they're at, what the date is. And then during the body of the letter, it says, well, we had 11 killed and 63 wounded, and we're marching constantly, and the rebels are there in front of us. And an interesting thing I learned was that the soldiers had to have stamps for the letters. So he's asking for his mother to send him some stamps. Here's another letter. And again, they're now within 40 miles of Atlanta during Grant's siege. So I made this kind of crude maps thing, what the date was, and then where they were and where they were going, and ended up about 40 miles from Atlanta. It's just a fascinating read. I became friends with artist Luigi Lucioni. This is one of his landscapes, which is in my collection. And I went to visit him one summer in Manchester, Vermont, where his studio was. And he took me to the very site where he painted this portrait, or this still life. I'm sorry, landscape. It looks the same as it did in 41, really. And I got a really interesting letter because he's writing to his sister Alice, and he says, I'm painting this gorgeous elm. And since the critics say I paint every leaf on the tree, you can imagine I have quite a summer ahead of me. He also painted around Barry, Vermont, and that's where there's a granite quarry there. And I think most of the tombstones in Arlington are probably Barry granite, that white granite. So my wife and I visited there one time. And of course, I always go to the old bookstores wherever I go. And I was directed to a bookstore in Plainfield, Vermont, and Liz Chestnut lived there. And I went into and looked around. I didn't see any books I wanted, but I asked the proprietor if he had any autograph material. He said, no, I don't. But just as I was leaving, he produced a 3-ring binder with about 50 letters in it. And most of it was kind of correspondence between Alfred Teichmann and Burt McCord, who was a reporter for the New York Herald Tribune, the entertainment reporter. And it was a back and forth correspondence, and I had both sides of the correspondence. And fascinating. They talked about all the gossip of Hollywood, who was turned out gay, and and there was a letter from Lord Halifax, the British ambassador, a really interesting letter from James Roosevelt, who was FDR's son and chief of staff for Roosevelt. And he's writing to his minister saying that, well, he can't afford the pew rent this year because he's a poor bureaucrat. There was a nice letter from Elihu Root, who was a Secretary of State, Secretary of War under Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. He's also Nobel Prize winner in 1912 and a senator. And just last week, I bought a Theodore Roosevelt presidential item. He had written a letter to Rutt, so added that to my collection and kind of a great companion piece. There was the letters by Geraldine Farrar, the actress and opera star, talking about her garden, how she loves green. And there's some really good political reference in there. It says, "These current bigwigs inspire in me only distrust," to put it mildly. There was a real gossipy letter from on Greta Garbo to Burt McCord. Then I kind of shifted to American historical documents. And I made a trip out to DC to see my son, who lived in Washington at the time. And Ed Bomsey had this Washington letter. And the second I saw it, I had to have it. And he's writing to his lawyer. And it seems that his tenant or one of his neighbors wants him to be executor of his estate. And Washington really didn't want to do it. He was way too busy, of course. But and Washington turned out to be right, because it took him 35 years to settle that estate. And then I was introduced to this Thomas Jefferson letter. And both the dealer and myself were a bit puzzled, because on the backside, the letter was addressed to Jefferson. And I remember in the back of my mind reading someplace that Jefferson had a planograph, which is a machine that had two pens linked. And we figured that, and we knew that Jefferson had used scraps of paper for the copy. So we figured that this was the copy of a letter. And actually, I'm happier with that than having the actual letter. The planograph was invented in England, and the Charles Wilson Peale, which we talked about earlier, in his museum, he actually bought the patent. He sold this to Jefferson. And Jefferson had as many as 6 of them. I think they were pretty fragile during his lifetime. And Jefferson wrote over 20,000 letters in his lifetime. And this is one of my recent acquisitions. Is during the Civil War in 1864, the group was formed called the Sanitary Commission. And it was a group of people who were interested in improving the lives of Union soldiers and their families. And they would have these fairs around the country called the Sanitary Fair. And the largest and probably the most successful was the Sanitary Fair in Philadelphia in 1864. And Lincoln and his wife and son attended one day. And with him, he brought 48 printed copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, which he had signed. And they sold them for $10 each. And I looked up, Stuart Lutz looked up for me, that one sold at auction in 1989 for $2,170,000. Pretty good return on investment, I'd say. This is kind of a similar item that's from the Sanitary Fair. Does not say that on there, but everybody feels that it is. It was a one-page sheet of autographs of the president's cabinet in 1864, and Abraham Lincoln signed on top. There's probably 4 or 5 known, and this one is unique because it's the only one we know that is numbered. And if you do a little research, which I did, and the dealer also included me in, that Lincoln numbered this himself because he had very distinct numbers. So I compared it to many numbers in letters he had written, and they matched exactly. So what about collecting today? Well, I think this is a great time to collect because things are readily available, and they're much easier to find than they used to be, waiting for dealer catalogs to come, although I really enjoyed having dealer catalogs, to tell you the truth. And so I follow 3 auctions routinely: our auctions, heritage auctions, and Lionheart auctions. And every once in a while, probably a half a dozen times at least, I've gotten real bargains because I wanted a letter by Pauline Bonaparte. And why? Because that's Napoleon's sister, because she was married to General Leclerc of Haiti. And he died there of yellow fever shortly after he arrived. And she moved to Italy and married Count Borghese. And many of you have been to Rome, and some of you are going to Rome, so you'll probably see this sculpture by Antonio Canova of Pauline Borghese. And so nobody bid on this letter. I bought it for $200. One had been offered to me probably at least a decade earlier for 2000, and it's got great contents. She's writing to her lawyer, and he's negotiating a sale of her jewelry, 30,000 piastres of jewelry, because she has this huge stable of horses, and she wants to keep feeding her horses. So it was a great find. So we reached the end of our program. I'd like to leave you with a few quotes. And the years may wrinkle your skin, but only a lack of passion will wrinkle your mind. Life is painful without a rest. What a better way to rest than to spend a few idle hours at your desk, holding history in your hands and savoring your letters and documents. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Well, there we go. Thank you so much, Stuart. Now, Stuart is actually on the line with this, so I'm going to make sure that we unmute him, and I'm going to put up a couple of things here just shortly. Let me do this, and we'll get you. Stuart, you can unmute yourself now if you like. I think you're unmuted. Good. Are you with us?
Yes,
Great. You want your video? You want your camera on or camera off?
it can be on.
All right. I'm going to, there you go. All right. Get set up there too. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint, and we're going to share my screen again just a little bit. We'll cover a few things, and then we'll get you going with your questions. Your video is up. We can see you, and we're so glad. And thanks. This is a little unusual tonight because we don't normally, we usually run everybody live, but that worked out. That worked out just great. Where's my PowerPoint? There it is. Let's do that. I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll be all set. Play from start. I'll go to. Oops, I got to do this again. Hang on. I'll do this one more time. Got two screens going here. All right, let's share first. Share my screen, and we'll get you started. Play from current slide. So here's what's happening. There we go. Go through this. Thank you, Stuart. It was just great. And the video worked out really well. And I'm so glad that you were able to join us tonight. I'm glad your schedule worked out for us. So it's just delightful. We're going to get to questions in just a little bit, but just a couple of things. At the end of this program, you'll get an email that says, thanks for joining. That letter will serve as your certificate of attendance. It won't come immediately after you're done. It'll be within 24 hours of the end of the program. So you should have that. Keep the copy. Look for the emails. We don't send out second ones. We don't send them out to your organizations if you're looking for continuing education credits. So watch for that and you'll be good to go. The webinar, we're going to post this up on our Manuscript Society site. I'll give you that site in just a little bit. Give me about a week to get it up. It'll also show up on our YouTube channel as well. That's great. And I want to thank the trustees and the staff of the Manuscript Society for letting this happen. And certainly for you for being a part of our program, which happens first Monday of every month. We have more programs on the way. I'll tell you what those are in a second. But are there topics you'd like to see or like to have covered? And is there a presentation that you'd like to make? You want to present a program? We'd be delighted for me to chat with you a little bit about what you have to offer, and we'll see if we can get it going. So do let me know. If you like the program and you want to support it as an underwriter, I'll give you all the details on how to do that. We'll certainly promote you or your organization if you happen to be an underwriter of one or more of the programs, and we'll have some slides with your information on it so people know who you are if you'd like us to do that. What's next? July 3rd, we're going to do our summer beach party, which is kind of an open meeting. People can share questions and share their stories and see what's happened their way and all the things that are going on with that. On August 7th, Howard Margo is going to talk about the John Law Papers, not the John Law Peps, that's a typo, the John Law Papers. And on September 4th, our own Barton Smith is going to be talking about his Charles Darwin collection. So it's going to be a fun-packed fall, and we got programs right through the end of the year. If you're not a Manuscript Society member, you can join right now. Well, wait till we're finished with Stuart's questions. You can go to manuscript.org, or you can email me anytime at Brian@Cathanis. That's my first name at my last name. And with that, we have some questions for Stuart. So on your little chatty phone there, on your toolbar, there's a Q&A, and you can either raise your hand, and I will see if you raise your hand, or you can just type your question into the Q&A, and that will be just fine. I have to tell you, Stuart, as I watched you record the presentation, I have a couple of clients that actually had some of those paintings of the artists that you talked about. So I'm going to make sure we connect them with your presentation so that they can hear a little more get a little more history on the artists that they happen to have. Good. Any thoughts you'd like to add, Stuart, as before our questions come up?
No, I made one little error in there.
Go ahead.
It's Liz Dow and not Liz Chestnut.
Oh, okay, right. Got it. Okay.
I don't know whether Liz still lives in Plainview, but
Oh, there you go. Hey, Wendy Katz asked, what made you decide to buy the Eugene Benson set of letters?
well, I'm very interested in archive material, and so I actually have about 5 archives, very extensive. I have a South Seas painter. I have about 100 letters by him, fascinating. And then the Charles Benson letters. That would be a book too. So no, they're just. I mean, it takes me a month to catalog them all and scan them and things. But you know, what better time than I have? I'm got a lot of free time.
That's great. I'm sending a response to one of our attendees to find out if he'll allow me to share his if I can share it. John, I want to know if I can share your comment, or if you want, I will unmute you if you prefer and you want to share that. I just think that's a hoot. So I'm gonna unmute you, John, and you can share whatever you want. You just have to wait a minute. You just have to unmute yourself. Where did you go? I lost you for a second there. Where did you go? Oh, there it is. Yeah. So John, if you can just, you want to unmute yourself, you can share that if you want. He's coming up. He hasn't unmuted himself. There he goes. Are you there, John? I don't hear him, and I haven't heard back from him, so I'm not going to share his comment. Other questions coming in. We got a few more. Here we go. Let's see what I got from John. We took care of that. John's going to have to answer me. I got 2 open. Wendy says, that's great. Thank you, Wendy. That's good. So what originally got you started, Stuart? What was the first thing that you saw that just got you into this and kept you in it for so long?
Well, I began my practice in 1970, and we bought a new house. There was no other housing available, actually, and so we had a lot of bare walls. So I bought a print by Renoir, and I began collecting Renoir prints. He did 59 prints in his lifetime. I actually had 39 at one time. So then I started collecting Mary Cassatt, and then I had to have a Mary Cassatt letter, and then a Renoir letter, and then started collecting the French Impressionists. I have many French Impressionist letters, Manet and the others, and so it just kind of. Then I started collecting books, on each artist, trying to find out more, and that morphed to 12,500 volumes. So
that's pretty crazy. That's wonderful. That's great. Hey, David asked if you could talk a bit more about your closing statement about holding the letter that a great artist is and how important the document was as part of their lives. Share a little more about that, because that was a really great closing quote.
Well, I just get a thrill every time I handle the things, really. I'll get them out quite frequently, and I'll just, here's a letter by Gilbert Stuart, the painter of Washington, which I mentioned. He's a major portion of American history, really. Everybody has a portrait of Gilbert Stuart or a picture of it, and every school in the nation has it. And the whole letter that he wrote, I mean, it's beyond belief. And Toussaint L'Ouverture, such a great man. I wish maybe some of him would rub off on me by just holding his letter, So no, it's a thrill, and I don't think anybody who collects doesn't get a thrill holding them, really. And even minor letters, have some effect, really. So
Sure. Understood. That's great. Hey, John said his microphone is open now. So John, can you share? Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, John. Go ahead. Fire away.
Well, I just shared with Brian that I'm a new member, and I've enjoyed these webinars so long, and they're a gift, and so I feel so guilty about and enjoying the webinars that I joined to try to make the gift mutual, and so I would encourage other people to do the same.
Thank you, John. That's great. It makes us all very happy, and we're delighted that you were there to support us, and that's just really great. And I know it'll make Shirley Sands, our executive director, super happy. And we picked up quite a few members, and we're delighted you're there. I'm glad that we can interact. Any other questions or thoughts for Stuart while we got you on the mic?
Well, I do actually, and my question would be, Stuart, when you are making these kind of unplanned purchases, at the small town, bookstore, how do you gauge, I guess the probability of authenticity when you are buying, a batch of letters or what have you?
Well, I don't really buy major things in a bookstore. I happen to buy those letters at that Plainview bookstore, but nobody's going to fake a letter by Howard Teichman, and even how interesting it is, Elihu Root. Very few people collect that kind of thing, and I only paid like $30 for it, so it wasn't much money, but the Degas Whistler thing is, I got that almost for nothing, and that was just a fortuitous thing, and I thought about it for many, many years, whether it was genuine, because the fact that it was published in a book would kind of make me think that maybe some forger saw that, that article and then decided to forge it. But I have had it authenticated, so.
That's
Okay,
great.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good deal. Well, with that, I am going to wrap us up for the evening. Stuart, last thoughts before we call it a night?
Yep, that was fun.
Good. I'm so glad you were able to join us. That worked out really well. And despite a little bit of the technical swapping back and forth, I think your recording went really well. I got to hear it twice, which is great. And you can hear it as many times as you want because it's going to be on our YouTube channel. Remember to go to manuscript.org. Look at Manuscript Monday. I hope you can join us for some down the road. And if you're not a member, I hope you become a member. Thanks to all of you and to everybody else, and especially to Dr. Embury for being with us tonight. I am so delighted that you could join us, and I always love your programs. I hope you can give us another one down the road. Good night, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Good night.